So the second part of our lecture for Chapter 17, you can see, is really going to focus on manifest destiny and the war with Mexico. So take a moment to take note of our outline here, and then let's get started. To begin manifest destiny, let's focus on trouble that the United States is experiencing with Great Britain. There really was this strong anti-British sentiment. And if we think about why that is, part of it's because, remember, the Federalists, who had always been pro-British, they have died out. We've had 2 wars against Britain. The British still tend to look down on the uncivilized Americans. There's still just this feeling that we are not quite good enough. And so there's this war of words between the United States and Britain. Another reason why there's some tension between the two is because in the 1800s, when the United States is trying to build up its infrastructure, we're building canals and we're building railroads and we're really trying to build up the country, we're borrowing money in order to do that. And the country that we're borrowing a lot of it from is Britain. So there's some of that we're constantly going over and asking for more money. And we really start to see some of this tension come to a head in what becomes known as the Caroline Affair. In 1837, there was a small rebellion in Canada that broke out. Remember, Martin Van Buren had to deal with it. And Americans were supplying arms to the rebels. There's an American steamer that's called the Caroline that ends up being attacked by the British in New York and set on fire. An American is killed, and then the Americans retaliate, and there's a British steamer that is going to be seized and burned. And really things seem to be, escalating between the United States and Britain. And part of this is what's happening in the northeast corner of the United States. Maine has been an issue for a while. Maine had claimed territory on its northern and eastern border that was also claimed by England. So with the tensions that existed between the U.S. and Britain, emotions are running high, and there are all of these little skirmishes in the Maine area that grew into what's known as the Aroostook War. Eventually, there's a treaty that is sort of worked out there, things settle down, and we see that the northeast corner of the United States is going to be solidified. The borders are going to be solidified. And that's really a lot of what's happening during this time period of manifest destiny. We're figuring out what the modern day borders of the United States are going to be. So, now that we've taken a look at the Northeast, let's shift our focus and start looking down at Texas. Texas became an independent nation, independent from Mexico in 1836. However, Texas is struggling to maintain its freedom. Mexico tried to invade Texas twice, and while the invasions were ineffective, it still created this sense of fear with a lot of Texans. There was talk about the United States annexing Texas, having Texas join the United States, but can we do that without a war? To make things even more complicated, Britain has an interest in keeping Texas as an independent nation. Britain would love to see this American expansion kind of stop. Plus, Texas could be a great other country that Britain could buy cotton from. So cotton is not necessarily king to the United States South. Perhaps there could be other places where foreign nations could go to buy cotton. Remember that Britain has also abolished slavery, and so there was talk that if Britain were able to sort of get some influence over Texas, they would hopefully be able to persuade Texas to end slavery, and maybe that attitude would spread to other states. So John Tyler, when he's running for re-election in 1844, he puts all of his chances on re-election on the annexation of Texas, because that would gain him the support from the South. John C. Calhoun also comes in, the war hawk from South Carolina, and he would like to see another slave state. And part of this is because the abolitionists are gaining some steam and they're slowly gaining support. So there ends up being a public relations campaign to help turn public opinion in favor of annexation. And James K. Polk is going to be elected in 1844. And James Polk is Mr. Manifest Destiny. He has expansionist ideas, And as soon as James K. Polk is elected as the president in 1844, Texas the next year is going to be formally invited to officially join the United States. Congress took this as a mandate from the public that the people supported annexation. Mexico was unhappy because they felt that the Americans had taken land that rightfully belonged to them. So while now we see what's going on in the southern part of the United States, again, let's shift our focus and let's move to the northwest corner with Oregon. Oregon is a huge area that goes from the tip of California all the way up to the 5440 line right up here. And this whole Oregon area, all of this, had been claimed by several countries at once. Russia, Spain, England, and the US all claimed that land. And really now it's just down to England and the United States. And with this dispute as far as who really is going to own the Oregon territory, it's really overshadowed by what's going on with Texas. Texas is much more controversial at the time. However, once we sort of get the whole Texas issue settled and Texas is annexed, now people refocus their energies on the northwest corner. And there's this push that the United States should have all of Oregon, all the way up to the 5440 line. And if we don't get 5440, then perhaps we ought to fight Britain for it. Now, every president since James Monroe has offered to compromise on the Oregon territory, and every one of them has offered the 49th parallel as a reasonable place to split the Oregon territory. However, all of these offers have been largely ignored. President Polk is going to really push for all of Oregon, but he also realizes that we would be perfectly fine with the 49th parallel. So with a war with Mexico looming, because we are annexing Texas, and America not needing another war, there is a treaty worked out in 1846 that does establish the 49th parallel as the northern border for the northwest corner of the United States. So we've taken care of the northeast corner, we're adding land in the south, and now we're also solidifying our northwest border. And with all of this coming to the United States, this is part of our manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is a belief that dates back to the Puritans who felt they were selected or chosen to come to the New World. And it's this idea that the United States will continue to expand coast to coast. And part of the reason why people said we needed to do this was because our population growth required territorial expansion. And some of these expansionists want nothing short of controlling the entire North American continent, which ought to be a warning sign for Mexico. The United States had strained relations with Mexico. Mexico did officially recognize Texan independence, but they were not happy with American annexation of Texas. Another reason there's tension between the United States and Mexico is because Mexico owed American citizens over $3 million and had defaulted on the loans. We're still arguing over what exactly is the southern border. Is it the Rio Grande or is it the Nueces River? Where exactly does Mexico, or where does Texas end, and where does the United States begin? And another issue is James K. Polk wanted to add California to the United States as well. So in an attempt to work out a deal with Mexico, the United States presents an offer. Senator John Slidell is sent to Mexico City to try to buy California for about $25 million. However, once he gets there, the Mexican people have pressured their government to not sell. John Slidell is not even seen, which then is going to lead some people in the United States to saying, well, if you won't even talk, we should prepare for war. And as the war is being prepared for, General Zachary Taylor is going to be ordered into this disputed area between the United States and Mexico. Polk was hoping that by moving troops into here, this would hopefully force Mexico to fire first. That could be seen as a threatening move, and then he could ask Congress to declare war. A lot of people in his cabinet thought that this was a pretty weak reason to go to war. However, it happened. There was an attack, fighting between Mexican and American soldiers in that disputed area. President Polk asks for a declaration of war, and he gets it. There were some people, some politicians, who questioned the motives that James K. Polk had in asking for war, and one of them was, as we see here, young Abraham Lincoln. He was serving in Congress at the time and really questioned, was American blood in fact spilled on American soil, or was it actually on Mexican soil? Abraham Lincoln is in the minority here, and there's going to be a war against Mexico. President Polk was hoping that once America had beaten Mexico enough in this war, he could get California and end the war. Santa Anna, the former president of Mexico who had been dethroned, offered that if he could return to Mexico, he would take over the government there and he would end the war and give California to the U.S. This doesn't happen. He actually rallies troops to fight against the U.S., and it doesn't work out for the way the United States expected or the way Santa Anna expected. General Zachary Taylor, that person who was sent into the disputed territory, his nickname is Old Rough and Ready. And General Zachary Taylor fights in Mexico, and with only 5,000 men, he repels 20,000 Mexican soldiers and instantly becomes this hero. General Winfield Scott leads American troops into Mexico City, and after about 2 years of fighting, this is a pretty clear American victory. So we have to talk about the peace. The peace treaty that is going to bring this one to an end is called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, ending the war, the U.S.-Mexican War, is going to give a huge chunk of northern Mexico to the United States. America gains all Mexican territory from Texas to California, all the way up here into this border with Oregon. It's going to establish the Rio Grande as the border between the U.S. and Mexico. The U.S. will take over the claims of those American citizens against Mexico, the money that had been owed, and the U.S. will pay $15 million for this chunk of land known as the Mexican Cession. So this is the land that Mexico will cede to the U.S. And if we take a look at the war itself, I mean, we don't spend a lot of time on the war. So what was its legacy? One of the most important legacies for the U.S.-Mexican War is that this is going to be the training ground for a lot of people who are about to fight in a few short years in the U.S. Civil War. On the left, we see Ulysses S. Grant. On the right, we have Robert E. Lee. Both of these men who are going to be leaders on opposite sides during the Civil War, this is where they're really getting their training. Another legacy is outside countries will now respect the United States more. This war went very smoothly for the United States, and it really showed that we had our fighting prowess was developing. Lastly, David Wilmot is a congressman from Pennsylvania, and he introduced the Wilmot Proviso. The Wilmot Proviso was a law that said that slavery would not exist in any land taken from Mexico as a result from the U.S.-Mexican War. And while this particular bill is going to be passed by the House, where the Northerners are going to dominate with their larger population, it is never going to get passed in the Senate. So what we're seeing here is there is still that question of what are we going to do now that we have expanded farther? Are we going to allow slavery to expand farther west now that we are fulfilling our manifest destiny? And that is the end of our lecture for Manifest Destiny in Chapter 17.